All right, this is going to be a very cool conversation with Robert Vicino. He is the CEO of the Vivos Group. The Vivos Project is headed by him, as I just mentioned. He's an entrepreneur with a global history of success in manufacturing, marketing, and real estate development. In 1980, he was inspired to build a shelter for 1,000 people deep underground to protect them from a coming life extinction event. That was 35 years ago, but it was so vivid and compelling that he dropped everything and started looking for an underground cave or an abandoned mine or something that could be hardened to create a shelter of massive proportions to save as many people as he could. He was not very religious at the time, did not know who the Mayans were, had no other motivation or cause to be alarmed, just a very strong inspiration that he now believes was from Almighty God himself. In his 20s, he was already very successful with nearly 100 employees, and what he learned pretty quick was that the world wasn't ready to hear or consider the proverbial doomsday concern. That was true until 2008, when he mentioned it once again to a small group of friends, and their reaction was, it's time. The world is on the verge, and people are ready. So in 2008, the Vivos Project was officially launched as a privately funded venture to provide a life assurance shelter solution for as many people as possible in the face of virtually any catastrophe. So with the conviction that this was his true mission, clearly inspired, either fortunately or unfortunately, because he had the unique skill set to get it done, is a huge responsibility, sticking his neck out for ridicule, of course. We're familiar with that one, aren't we? And he's invested years of his life and savings to save others. He now accepts that responsibility with great humility and gratitude that he can, together with a team of experts in engineering, architecture, construction, medicine, psychology, healthcare, nutrition, law, the Constitution, finance, management, logistics, security, and self-defense, each dedicated to bringing the Vivos network to reality around the world. Wow, that's what I call a mission. First time on Caravan to Midnight. Welcome, Robert Vicino. Good to have you with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much to have us.
You know, I got a feeling there's a lot more to the story than what I just read, although what I just read is quite a story. So why do you believe that this was inspiration sent directly from the greatest of the great, God himself?
Because it was a inspiration in my mind that happened in the middle of nowhere, which is how I got a lot of my thoughts at the time, by the way, to the extent that I got about 18 patents, and some of those came to me like that back then. So I don't know. I was open. I was receptive, but maybe as well I was chosen. And at the time, I didn't have any of the skill sets to do this, and in fact, why me? And I said, I don't have the skills, I don't have the technical ability, and I don't have the resources, the financial resources. So, but again, I was like 25 years old. Although I was very successful in the business I had at the time. 26 years old, I had a Rolls Royce that I bought myself. When I started my business at 25, I had $500 to my name. So, I did pretty well. But I think the moral to the story was that over the subsequent 30, 35 years, I did indeed develop those skills. And I think the evidence of it is I've done it. We now have Vivos shelters. And our mission is coming to reality, just unfortunately not fast enough. I was asked by a cynical reporter on NPR, I think it was, doing a remote broadcast. She says, well, aren't you kind of a modern day prophet? And I said, no. And I'd rather say I'm a not-for-profit. I haven't made a dime at this. So, it's a honor and a burden at the same time.
Yeah.
And it has been quite a struggle. I got to tell you, I've invested everything I've got into Vivos and bringing Vivos to reality. And with that, it goes a lot of your, your reputation and your health. Everything is attacked when you do a mission like this.
Your site is actually quite compelling. It's a very nice site, terravivos.com, TerraVivos, everybody. And there's a section in here on prophecies. Let me just read a little bit from it, if you don't mind, Robert. It's we've all heard the prophecies of the end times. The Bible warns of it. Nostradamus foresaw it. Edgar Cayce predicted it. The Hopi Indians, the third secret of Fatima, St. Malachi, and prophets throughout the ages all warn of the same epic global catastrophes that will befall the Earth. We've been warned of Armageddon, Nibiru, Planet X, a sudden pole shift, future plagues, an EMP blast, a solar kill shot, a supervolcanic eruption, major Earth changes, killer asteroids and comets, mega tsunamis, an economic meltdown, and even the anarchy that will certainly follow any one of these events. The truth is, we don't know what, when, or where catastrophe will happen, but whether we want to believe it or not, it likely will. It's only a matter of time. Kind of like riding a motorcycle. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how bad. And so, I see that you have several sections on the site: life assurance, preservation, preparations, the prophecies I just read from, time remaining, network shelters, shelter prices, and apply now. So give us the rundown, the everything from why you selected the name, Vivos, to where we are now, how it's going, and how people can get involved in this, and how long, in fact, can they expect to survive if they have to, go underground, do the old THX 1138 thing.
Well, let's start with where you ended, and that is, let's hope we never have to go underground.
Yeah.
What I've developed is the one piece of real estate that you hope you never have to use. All right. So I sit here and don't pray and wish for this stuff to happen, but I am very comforted to know that I have a solution. And in fact, it's kind of a hedge on the world as it is today, because if everything hits the fan, so to speak, you're going to find your bank account going down in value, the dollar going down in value, your real estate, every other thing you might have invested in. But at the same token, the shelter is going to go up in value. So it gives me some peace of mind sitting out here in California with a piece of real estate that could be gone tomorrow. God forbid, knock on wood, I better not say that. But it's, I'll say that it has been a struggle to bring this to fruition to where we are today. We've got several shelters. Our most notable is the one in Indiana, which was a former Cold War era bunker built by the government. It's very large. We bought it at pennies on the dollar, but then we turned around and I put about $2 million into it to modernize it and retrofit it, outfit it, furnish it, and stock it with all the food, medicine, everything that's linens, fuel, water systems. These things are like underground submarines, is probably the best way to put it. There's two of everything. Everything is redundant, so 2 generators, 2 hot water heaters, 2 stoves, 2 microwaves, 2 refrigerators. Everything is duplicated. So that if one breaks during a shelterization period, we have a backup. And we also have parts and so on and so on. But, half of what I've created here is the shelters, which are, without an ample shelter, you won't survive some of these events, what may be, ahead of us and to come. So it all starts with a worthy shelter. And in the case of Indiana, that one was designed to withstand a 20 megaton blast from 10 miles away. All right. Now it's out in the country. It's in the middle of farm fields, a lot of corn and soybeans and so on, and nowhere near any targets. So we're comfortable. We're not at ground zero. But that said, think about the strength of a structure to withstand that blast. I think the biggest nuke that has ever been tested is only 50 megatons. So, we're right up there in resilience. In fact, I was told by former workers who worked at the facility that the entire shelter, which is deep underground, embedded in clay soil for some reason, I think because it absorbs the radiation better. This entire structure can be shoved sideways through the earth 30 feet without damage. All right, underground. That's like saying we have a rock and we're going to push it. So, in that regard, people often say, well, I love it, but it's in Indiana, and I want something closer. And so I'm looking at other alternatives. And I always like to say, well, it's not about proximity. It's about survivability. A bad shelter in your backyard is not going to save you. In fact, if all you've got is the proverbial 28 or 29 minutes of notice because you're at ground zero and a nuke is coming in, you're not even going to make it to your backyard shelter. Because, we don't even have a civil defense system anymore. There's not going to be an alert. The government's going to be scrambling under such a scenario that they're not going to get on the TV and radio and let you know. And besides, even if they do, what if you're asleep? Nothing's turned on. You're not going to be clued in. What if you're out at school or at work or shopping or playing tennis or at the beach or whatever? The chances of you getting to a shelter, even in your backyard, are slim to none. The only people, in my opinion, that make it into a shelter when they're within range of a nuclear blast are the ones that are already in the shelter. I.e. the guys, the two that have the keys in the nuclear missile silo. They're in there. They're already locked in, and they have the best chance of survival. So, what Vivos was created for was not ground zero. If you're at ground zero, you probably aren't going to have anything to worry about, and we wish you best wherever you may be going. But for all other scenarios, I believe there's notice. I believe there's time. For example, let's say a nuke goes off in London or Paris. Might be a good sign that we should head to shelter here in America or everywhere in the world, because that scenario, that situation could evolve. We could be next. Let's say a pandemic is breaking out, head to shelter. Let's say the lights go out, an EMP or coronal mass ejection. Most people are going to sit around and party. Some people are going to party in downtown by way of grabbing every flat screen TV they can find. We've seen that whenever the lights go out. So, but by the third day, people are going to start to realize the lights aren't coming back on, and the government isn't going to show up to help them. And that's when reality sets in, and that's when fear, panic, and Susie Homemaker next door will become your worst nightmare, because she's going to do what she has to do to protect her family and save her children. So, it's going to be an ugly situation, regardless of which one of these scenarios. As we've evaluated, every single scenario ends with anarchy, or let's call survivors that are going to be scraping and starving on the surface, and the haves and the have-nots. So those people that have survived and have prepared and have food in their basement, in the garage, wherever it may be, they're going to have it for as long as they can hold on to it. And that's the next problem, is that, as the have-nots are going to show up at your door. And if it's you and your family, or you and your neighbors, or your cousins, or whatever, are you really going to be able to put up a defense? There's going to be more of them that don't have than those that do have.
Oh, yeah.
So whether it be the event itself that you have to survive, or the aftermath, which I think is just as big a deal, if not bigger, you really do need to A, have a shelter, B, have a security force, and that's what we created, Vivos, and then 3, have a comfortable enough environment that you can ride out the duration, whatever it may be. People have said to us, I would never want to be underground for a year. How could you survive a year? They don't understand. If we're underground with the door sealed, it's because we can't be on the outside, and neither can you. Nobody can survive on the surface, at least within the region that we're in. That's what causes us to go under. And so why would you have pity on them? You should have pity on yourself and fear and concern for yourself, your own safety and that of your family, because you're the one without a solution. You know, we've had crazies, I mean, absolute insane people saying, we're going to show up and block all your air shafts. One guy a couple weeks ago said he was going to show up with a plasma torch and seal our vault door. You know, and to that I'd like to say, well, we wish you luck. In fact, if you'd like to come around sooner, you know, our security team would like to have some practice on such an intrusion. But, you know, it's laughable to think that we're down there without security. We're down there without security measures. Let me just put it to you this way. There are some things that are like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So even if you got on the property and even if you got into the stairwell, you're not going to make it to the door. But beyond that, we have excellent, excellent security, including I've got several colonels active duty in the Army, guys that flew for Blackwater, heavy Sikorskis, guys that served in Iraq, and unfortunately did pull the trigger when they needed to. So these are the real McCoy. These are guys that are going to be there to protect the other members. And we also have a team of medical people from one of the best surgeons in the world, from what I can evaluate and what his reputation is, to all sorts of doctors, dentists, registered nurses, intensive care, basically everything you're going to need so that as a community underground, and I guess that's where I rambled on from, is we not only created the shelter, but we created the community of like-minded people within each shelter of different skills and skill sets, talents, that they can all support each other. So, and I'll tell you, one of the guys that would be most important would be a plumber. What happens if the toilet overflows or breaks? That would be a real disaster. So, or a pipe breaks. Or we have an electrical problem, so we need electricians, we need carpenters, we need mechanics to fix and repair generators or keep them running. So we have really reached out and found a cornucopia of talents of just about every cross-section that you would need of America. So it's not just the shelter, and it's not just the proximity, and but it's all of the above. You've got to have a complete A to Z package of people and brick and mortar and so on. And all that for really a bargain price, and that's why we did it the way we did it, as co-ownership, if you will, wherein I build the shelter, and then in doing so, we determine the optimum number of people that it will accommodate comfortably. We use a rule of thumb of about 125 to 150 square feet per person, effectively. The U.S. or the Red Cross says 45 feet is a comfortable, effective square footage per person for a long duration shelter. The Homeland Security says 50 or 55. We said, no, we're going to make it more comfortable than that, because, you know, the last part of the puzzle is you have to psychologically survive. And so if you're down there for a week, a month, 6 months, or a year, or more, maybe it's 2 years before we come back out. And let me emphasize, we won't be down there for 1 minute longer than we have to. So it's not that we want to be down there, or that, oh, poor people, they're there for a year, whatever. We will, as long as it takes, is really the theme. But while we're there, we're going to be as comfortable as possible. So some people have referred to the Vivos shelters as 5-star hotels. Others have said, 4-star. I don't think I've heard anybody say less than 4. I was on a radio interview with a guy, a talk show, morning drive time show in Vancouver, Canada, and he was very cynical, and from the onset. And so it got a little combative, which I enjoyed actually, because I love to respond to cynics and show them how wrong they are. But in his case, he said, well, I understand your shelters are kind of like a 5-star Ritz-Carlton. And I said, no, I wouldn't call them a 5-star, but I would say probably a 4-star. And he said, oh, so more like a Holiday Inn. I said, yeah, probably like where you stayed last night to qualify you to be a radio announcer today.
Yeah, well, yeah, the cynics are everywhere. They really are. So,
let me just add, John. Sorry to interrupt.
No, sorry.
He also said that he thought it was crazy that the world has never been a safer place. That was 2 days before the Paris attack back in December.
Yeah, well, they think they know what they're saying, but they don't. They think they know what they're talking about, and they don't. And I can't remember what network-esque outfit you were on recently, and I went, man, I want to talk to Robert right now. So I called Ken and said, get a hold of him. Were you on Fox, or what was it? It looked like Fox colors.
We're everywhere. And, it's funny because I don't even know when I'm on something anymore. All of a sudden, we'll check the applications in the morning, and we've got 100 new applications to get into Vivos. And we go, oh, geez, we must have been on TV last night or somewhere. Because there's a lot of shows that repeat. We have requests. We've had literally thousands of requests to go into Vivos shelters and film them and do whatever they want to do. And our qualifier is, how many times will your show repeat? So a lot of the cable shows that we've done, they were a segment of a series, and it runs again and again and again. And so that makes it worth our while. I turned down the Today Show a couple of years ago. They wanted to do a live broadcast from the shelter. And it was going to be a 4 or 5 minute piece. And it would have required me to travel cross country, about a 3-day journey back and forth. And I said, it's just not worth it for 5 minutes. And so we turned those types down. Whoever we do bring to a shelter, we bring them with blindfolds in a blacked out Sprinter van typically. We strip them of all their GPS devices. Again, security is very important. I'll give you a couple other adages. The president of the #1 television network in France, called TF1, had contacted me because she was frustrated that several of their producers tried to get into Vivos, and we just kept turning them down. And she said, our audience deserves to know. And I said, you're right. They just don't deserve to know where. So we're very, very discriminate on who we allow in.
Yeah, really.
There's all sorts of confidentiality agreements and non-disclosure and so on. And here, on the television or media piece, let me just say this. We've also we're invited on Doomsday Preppers. You remember the show, and from the first season on, I think every year we got an invite, and we kept turning them down. And I had my reasons, but they were, really begging, because Vivos is the ultimate survivalist story. We're not about having your guns and your ammo and your camo and a bag of rice and a bag of beans and some hideout in the mountains, because, other than, let's say, anarchy or martial law, that's not going to save you from the kind of epic events that we have built and planned for that are coming. So where was it? We had the Doomsday Preppers just was unbelievably persistent, and so I said, look, we're never going to go on your show. So the young producer said, well, our executive producer Alan would like to talk to you, and I said, fine, get him on. So we talked, and I said, Alan, the reason I'm not going to ever go on your show is you make everybody look like an idiot. And he says, well, we don't really make them look like an idiot. We just disclose or reveal who they really are. And I said, yeah, that and a little creative editing, and look what you've got. Look what you've done to these people. You have made them effectively the laughing stock of of the world, so that you're turning people off. You're making people think that anybody that is looking for a shelter or survival solution is a crazy. And I said, Alan, let me tell you something. I said, you're in your office in New York, right? He said, yeah. I said, can you look out the window and see the building across the street? And he said, yeah. And I said, you see that window that looks a little different than all the other windows? And he said, yeah. I said, Alan, we're watching you. And he freaked out. I got to tell you, he went, what? And I was just doing that to give him a taste of his own medicine. And then I said, Alan, it was nice talking to you. We'll see you. That was the last conversation we had. So you see, I appreciate your show, John, because of your reputation and your integrity and your format. But there are just so many cynics out there, and one of the things that I've had to do is to learn how to deal with them and how to respond to all that.
Well, I'm in a safe space now. I have been for some time. It doesn't bother me in the least. I mean, I appreciate you saying that very much, Robert. And the thing about it is I've never fit into that mold. I'm one of those guys that if I'm going to do something, that I have to kind of take ownership of it. I mean, I don't mind following the rules. That's fine. But when it comes to something in the creative field, then let me create if I can, and if not, get somebody in here who can create. And by the same token, it doesn't really work when your bosses sort of impose the necessity for you to be creative on you. You shouldn't have to do that. But I can tell you unequivocally that most of the people that I've met, with a very few exceptions, and there are some exceptions, are sniveling, horrible little paycheck-taking weenies. And they aggrandize themselves at whomever's expense that aggrandizement calls upon them to do. It's just how it is. And I remember one time these guys came over to do a, back in the day, my dad and I had a hobby business. We sold machine guns to, qualified individuals. It's strictly a...
What, was this Chicago?
No. This is in Fort Worth. No, you don't have to do any paperwork in Chicago. We had to do paperwork, lots of paperwork. And the ATF came around a lot, and we knew all those guys and girls, and it was fine. And so the local NBC affiliate decided they would come over and they would do a story. And I was in this area of town, right down the street from General Edwin A. Walker, as a matter of fact, the guy who was shot at supposedly by Oswald in April 63 before the assassination. This man's one of my neighbors, right? And so here comes the news crew, and they've heard that John Wells is this dealer of these machine guns. Well, you've been able to do it forever. You just gotta go through a big rigmarole now to get paperwork signed. You got to do fingerprints. You got to do photographs. You got to do everything. And if you do anything with that's outside the law, pobrecito, you're going to wind up in so much trouble. You're going to wish you'd eaten that gun, literally, with a knife and a fork. So the long and the short of it is they come out there and they're kind of sneaking up on you a little bit, kind of like the ones that want to sell you the alkaline water machines that kind of sneak up on you. Try the water for a little while, then they're going to try and rope you into like a $3,000 machine that's probably not doing that much good for you, if any. So they edit this thing together. He goes, this guy just asked me, well, how do you hold this thing properly when you're shooting it? And I picked it up and I went just like that, So guess what they do? They go through this thing about how dangerous these things are potentially and all that. And then they got a picture of me holding this thing up going, just like that. Like, I guess the rest of it, the unspoken part is and you can rub out lots and lots of innocent people, including children. I mean, that's really the way that they wanted to tilt the story. So I didn't do any more of those. I saw it coming and I let them do it, but I didn't do any more. It was just stupid.
That's why I like live interviews, because they can't edit it.
Yeah.
And I've actually I did an interview with NPR, I think it was radio out of San Francisco, And they tried to get so many gotchas in there that, and I cut them off at every pass. She was extremely frustrated, and the show never aired. And I was like, yay, you know. I'd rather have no publicity than bad publicity, or no deal than a bad deal. One of her other comments was, she said, well, aren't you kind of a modern-day Noah? Do you think you're Noah? And I said, no, I don't aspire to that, but I do know of this. This crap's going to happen. So, by the way, John, you are an industry. You are your own trademark, and it resonates from your voice. Your voice is so distinctive and so well known that you are. Nobody can ever take that from you. And so whatever the agreements are, et cetera, you will always be the voice.
Oh, man. Thank you.
Sorry to fluff your ego there, but.
Well, you know what? I take that as a very, very nice compliment. And I got to tell you, I owe it all to the Lord, because if it weren't for him, I mean, I didn't design it. I didn't pick it. I had no idea I was ever going to do this, be in this line of work or do any of this stuff. Never knew that. In fact, people would tell me, hey, you got a good voice. You used to do radio. And I'm like, what? I'm not doing that. And I wound up doing it. So it's the old never say never syndrome. But yeah, thanks for that. I guess somebody could give me a smack in the windpipe, and that might turn me off for a while. But then again, I have every belief that the same great power that created everything could probably go, let me just fix that up for you. Okay, you can speak again. Just be nice. You know what I mean? Just tell the truth, or at least as close as you can come to it, and you'll be fine. But yeah, it's
you just got to stay healthy and make sure you got some insurance on that. Lloyd's of London, I'm sure, would be happy to insure your voice.
Yeah, I got that covered.
Do you?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, good. Let me, if I can digress. Since we're talking about the media and their reaction, or let's say agenda in dealing with stories like Vivos or the stuff that you report on all the time. In the very beginning, the media, the first year that we were out, I think it was 08, they were very attacking, and they said, this is crazy. This stuff will never be needed. So we had to try to educate them as to, really, are you aware of this and this and this and this, and what all of those things lead to, which may very well require you to go to shelter. The media back in that day, in those days, kept reaching out to a professor at some California university who was an expert on the Cold War. And he said, these things aren't needed. This is crazy. The Cold War's been over for a long time. And, so this dinosaur had his head in the sand thinking nothing else is ever going to happen. And when they ask me that question, I always say, yeah, he's right. The Cold War has been over, but the Holy War isn't. And it's been going on for thousands of years, and there's no end in sight. So, anybody that is so Pollyannic to believe that nothing is ever going to happen again, I too will believe that. But it'll be, if we follow the Bible, after the 7 years of tribulation, and maybe the 1,000 years of peace begins. But until then, I think that we still need to prepare in every way we can, internally and physically, and so on. But let me go back to the statement I was making about the media. The second year, they were saying, well, do these shelters really exist? And, despite having done live broadcasts with CNBC and multiple television producers that went and spent the night in a shelter and so on and so on, they still didn't want to believe it. Okay. So by the third year, they were saying, well, what does it cost to get into one of these things? And by the fourth year, they were saying, well, how many shelters are there? Do you still have space?
Good.
So what I found was, when we first introduced it, and I think we were the first to come out with, the modern day shelter, let's call it syndrome, and, we kind of created the market here. by today it's, I don't know, 6, 7 years later, and now they're all saying, well, how do we get into one? But they've actually taken it another step. You're going to love this. A reporter from Greenwich Village, I think she was, in her mid-40s, connived us to get into one of our shelters. So she flew there, I flew there, I met her, I took her in there, blindfolded.
Good.
We had drive about a half hour with a blindfold on. And I looked over at her and I said, so, are you comfortable? And she said, yeah, I was a little leery, but, you're kind of a public figure, so I guess I can trust you. You're not going to do anything crazy. I said, no, but, we're going to pull off over here in this dirt road and down into the woods, and we're going to stop. And just to kind of freak her out, and which we didn't. But we went to the shelter, and she went in, and, okay, she looked around, touched everything. Gee, it's real, and it's all everything you say it is. And she goes, look, I'm really hungry. Let's go to dinner. I said, okay, so we left. And, the whole time I was qualifying her as she was qualifying me, and my qualification was, where are you coming from? What's your angle on this story? And she swore to me she was a conservative and, blah, blah, blah. And so I trusted her. And we had a nice interview, a nice conversation. Well, anyway, she went back. And by the way, she had represented that she was reporting for Reuters. All right, and Reuters, AP, they're all international. It's nice. Turns out she was reporting for a very sophomoric, cynical network, that internet media channel, and I won't mention their name, but she came up with this headline: "Meet the man that's selling bunkers to the 1% paranoid."
It's okay with me. You can name any name you want. I'm not urging you to. I'm just saying it's okay. You do what you want on the show. Huh?
I got to go there as it is, so
okay.
I won't go there. I know I could say that to you, and your audience would enjoy it, your listeners. But anyways, who's selling shelters to the 1% paranoid? Now, she makes a number of leaps there, but what she did was she came up with a catchy headline that sold her story. And ironically, she did me a favor, because within a week of that story running... Hey,
I'm paranoid too. I'm going to call Robert.
It was in 38,000 different media around the world within a week. So it was just, it became viral, and it was everywhere. So that's fine. But I noticed that other media that picked up on the story changed the headline. They dropped the paranoia and they dropped the 1%, and they were a little more fair in their presentation. So, anyways, but back to her, what she twisted, and I don't know where she got it from, is that we sell to the 1%. Somehow in her mind, she thinks somebody who has $35,000 to buy into a multi-million-dollar shelter that they are going to co-own, that I'm selling for like 10 cents on the dollar, is the 1%. I don't know if you've shopped around lately, but that doesn't get you a speedboat, a good speedboat. It may get you a small RV. It may get you a mid-sized car, not even a luxury car. So are those the people she considers to be the 1%ers? We don't have any 1%ers. What Vivos is frankly middle class, maybe a little upper class, and maybe a little lower middle class. In other words, people that are living paycheck to paycheck. And what happens with them, or why they're in Vivos, is they are very aware. I would say the common denominator of people that have come to us is that they've done their homework, they're listening to shows like yours, and they connect the dots. They're very, very intelligent people. They're self-sufficient people. They're not waiting for the government to show up at their door to take care of them, which will never happen, as you know. The government's going to go to their own shelters, which they've built with your money and mine, and your name and my name and their names are not on the guest list. So they're not going to get in, but they're going to continue to believe the government's there for them. So good. Nature has its own cleansing process, and so I'll connect it another way. You remember 9/11. The people that had really strong survival instincts, self-sufficient, were the ones that got out of the building as quick as they could, regardless of what anybody said. You remember those that went back to their office when the security guard said, everything's all right, go back to your offices.
Yeah.
And they did. In fact, they wouldn't even let them out of the building. So, you have to start with good instincts. And second, you got to understand that, you're on your own. And what is Vivos? It's all it is life assurance. Not insurance, but an assurance policy that if this stuff happens, you have a place to go and your family, and hopefully we'll ride it out, we'll survive, and we'll come out the other side and find out what happened. And if there's a world worth living in, we will. If not, okay, we had an extra year or two to make our peace and hug our loved ones. But, there's always been survivors to every former extinction level event in the world. I mean, Noah, Atlantis, the dinosaurs, there's always been some survivors or we wouldn't be here today. And so, if you're in the right place at the right time, you're lucky, great. Congratulations. And I bet you and all your listeners would go there to join them if you knew where. But we don't know. We don't know where the safest place on the planet is or the right place at the right time. So therefore, we build a shelter, we know where that is, and we know that it can withstand all of these forces and all of these events. So we didn't prepare for one thing, we prepared for everything.
Yeah, isn't it funny? These people with what I would call they're known as the progressives. I refer to them, frankly, as the retards. But, they'll listen to some rock star. Bono keeps coming to mind, not because I particularly want to pick on Bono. It's all right. I like U2 just fine. He's all right. And I'm reminded of, as an Irishman, Bono standing up there and he starts clapping his hands, right? Slowly. And he said, every time I clap my hand, a child in Africa dies. And this Irishman says, well, stop bleeping doing it. But it's like they'll listen to the stories he's talking about, equality and fairness and refugees and this and that and the other, that go completely past the tax situation that he's been facing. And they don't realize that these rock stars, I mean, do people think Eric Clapton and Steve Winwood, the old-timers like that, These guys all have country houses. They don't live in London. They may have an apartment there. They may have a couple of apartments there. And they may have, an apartment in, who knows, Milano or something. But they live outside the city in the country. Anybody who can have, people who are not in the so-called 1%, they have little cabins. They have little deer leases. They have places where they can go to flee this, to flee these problems. They go, let's get to the deer lease, man. Of course, every other redneck and his deer rifle and a box of MREs is going to be out there too, but I digress. But what you've done is you've made a hardened cabin with a select group of people that you can rely on not to flip out, who will hold up their end of the log, and you're committed to the common cause. And the common cause is support each other and get through this. So it's pretty easy to imagine, at least, the kinds of people that you do not allow to become a part of this. But maybe you can amplify that a little.
Well, that's right. We turned down probably 25% of applications just by what they say in their application. So we have a little button and we hit it. It's called decline. And there's a lot of weird people out there. We also, unfortunately, here's our biggest problem. I mentioned the one percenters. I wish we had the one percenters as clients. And members. But, the truth is they all have their own shelters. Those country homes you mentioned? Bill Gates, his head of security was here in my office. We had some things in common. And so I said to him, does he or doesn't he have his own shelter? And he said, well, I'm not at liberty to say, but I will just say There's something very, very large underneath every one of his homes, country homes, Bellingham, Washington, and so on. And that holds true for just about every billionaire out there. You know, why wouldn't they? It's nothing to them. They're in their big picture. However, I say to them, I hope you have a big entourage of not just your staff and security, but people, you know, to get along with, because, you know, you can be very lonely in a private underground shelter, as you know, on your estate. But so, you know, Vivos is for the average guys, and what we look for first and foremost is like-minded. The next thing we look for is tolerance, that they are tolerant of others' point of views. So, for example, if you're a fundamentalist that is intolerant, that you know, it's your way only, and there's only one way to think, and if you don't think your way, you're going to hell. Now, who am I describing? ISIS? Radical Islam? Yeah. But there's other religions. Even radical Christians, you know, are going to, you know, are somewhat intolerant. And, you know, we've had people say, I won't go down there unless everybody's born again. You know, we've all said, people say, I would never go there if you've got children in the facility. Huh? That's what it's all about. We seek out families with young children because they are the future. And, you know, versus a bunch of retired old farts that are, you know, can't reproduce when we come out the other end and maybe have a responsibility of creating a brave new world. But they also say they don't like animals and they don't like this. And one guy said he needed 1,500 square feet just for himself. And I asked him, well, what do you live in now? And he says, well, an apartment. And I said, and how big is that? And obviously it was a lot less. So, you know, some people are unrealistic, unreasonable, and they say, well, I've had them say, well, I would never drive more than 100 miles to get to shelter. And I say, really? So if there was a shelter that you could get to and it was 105 miles,
forget it.
You're not going to go there. You're going to shut off your engine and turn around and go home. You know, we don't know how much notice we're going to have. We may have months of notice, years of notice. You know, if it's Planet X Nibiru coming in, I don't know from when the government can no longer hide it from the rest of us, the truth.
Yeah.
And when we can see it for our own eyes. But from that moment on, all hell's going to break loose. Society's going to break down. But that's the warning. That's the clock starts. Can you get to Vivos in the meantime? Yeah, I think so. I think you can get to Vivos from certainly anywhere on the continent or in Europe, where we have another facility, which we should talk about. But, you know, it's not, again, about proximity. I was on Fox News, and the reporter said, the host, it was, what was her name? Come to Midnight. And she says, well, how do we get there? And I said, well, it depends on what you're willing to give up. And she says, what do you mean? And I said, well, let's say that there's a little warning or many things that are starting to happen that, you know, make you wonder, geez, what's next? Maybe we should go to shelter. Are you willing to give up a day's work? Or a few days' work? Or are you willing to take kids out of school? Are you willing to pay for an airplane ticket if planes are still in the air? Are you willing to gas up the car and go? Or do you want to wait until it's so absolute that it's happening, that until you see it coming out of the sky, all right, or whatever the event is? But I'll use that example. You know, I'll believe it when I see it and it's coming out of the sky. John, we've also had people that have said that can afford Vivos, that money's not the concern, but they want to wait and see. You know, and I've had them say, well, I'll just show up at the door with my black American Express. And I've said to them, really, you do know that we don't take plastic. And we don't take American Express. And in fact, at that moment, we wouldn't even take cash. We're going to take gold and silver. And it's going to be whoever's got the biggest truckload that's going to get in. And also whoever's got the best skills. What are you bringing to the party? And maybe you're bringing some food and other things that we need, medicines, antibiotics, and so on. But let's look at the second part of what the guy said. I'm going to show up at the door. Really? You don't even know where the door is. So that's not a good survival plan. That is not, but you see, they're used to getting into anything they want, any event, any location, any hotel, any resort, at a moment's notice because of that Black American Express card. Unfortunately for them, I think they're going to regret those statements.
Yep.
In today's, last comment I'll make, in today's world, well, our slogan is we live in a very dangerous world. And we're just one form of insurance or solution. But you can't look for a solution when everything's unraveling. When everybody else is scrambling to find a cave or someplace to hide out, if you will, it's too late.
I know you don't know, but what do you think? Man-made or natural? Which one will hit us first when it happens, which it will? I mean, the odds compel that it will. We have only to look at history to see that it has happened repeatedly. We know that the same brand, make and model of psychopath and freak is in control of virtually all the governments of the world, with a few exceptions, usually the ones that run right, unlike our current situation here, but I digress. So what do you think? What do you think is most likely to get us, natural or man-caused?
I think it's both, and I think they're going to run concurrently. Let me mention, even though I mentioned some religions earlier, I am not religious, but I am. So I don't believe in religion, but I do believe in God. I am a huge believer in God and Jesus. I was brought up Catholic, but I kind of went away from it when I became a young adult and didn't have to go anymore. And I always said, I'll go to the church. I remember I was about 21 or 22, and I said, I will go to that church when Jesus comes down and stands on the steps and said, this is the one. This is the one that got it right. Follow them. Then I will. So that said, I'm not a Bible thumper, but I do know what the Bible says. And what it says in Revelations is that this stuff is going to happen. And I can't coin the phrase or refer to the specific phrase, but it said that we are going to be fighting our war in Armageddon, and everybody's going to lay down their arms when they look up in the sky and see this thing coming and realize, why bother? What are we fighting for? And they go back to be with their families and so on. So don't condemn me for not knowing the chapter and verse, but I'm doing my part here. And what I'm saying is, it's already happening. Both things are already happening. Let's talk about Fukushima, for example.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't one event. It was a ripple of events. So there was an earthquake, which led to a tsunami, which led to the power plant getting destroyed, which led to radiation leaking, which has now led to deaths across the Pacific of animals and fish and so on. And it's not over. That event keeps on going. But to be more responsive to your question, right now we're on the verge of an economic collapse. And I think everybody would agree. Emergency meeting a week or so ago between Biden, Obama, and the head of the Fed. They don't have emergency meetings with the Fed other than for what? Is the petrodollar about to evaporate? And so I don't know if anybody's used this phrase. I'll coin it. I think it's going to become the retrodollar. All right. And when that happens, America's prominence in this world is going to start to collapse. And so an economic collapse, let's call it, will ruin your day. And the aftermath is going to be tremendous. Martial law would probably be a part of that ripple effect, or maybe it happens first and the economic collapse is second. perhaps Middle East war, perhaps more terrorism. Big terrorism, such as a nuke in Washington or New York or wherever it may happen. So all of these man-made events are already happening. They're already in motion. The question is, will they become more severe? Will it hit the fan? Will we have a total meltdown? Personally, I believe we've got about 6 months remaining before something startling does happen. And where do I get that number or that time frame? It's the election.
Yeah.
I think if the powers that be are going to do anything, they have to do it before the election, because once there's a president-elect, they really won't have the power to play any games. So, do they sabotage the election? Does Hillary get indicted? Does Trump get knocked off? Or just one or the other, creating a disenfranchisement of, the process, and therefore, a cancellation of the elections, and we'll reconvene and do it again in 4 years, and what that means with who stays in charge and so on. So, is it possible? Yeah. Is it probable? Yeah. In fact, let me carry it one step further. I was invited on Fox TV Saturday night TV show called Justice with Judge Janine.
Yeah, I typically like her pretty well.
Oh, I love her. I love her opening monologues, and they typically end up on YouTube, and she's so right on. She, love it. But anyways, her producer called me, and we talked, and then she said, the judge is going to want to talk to you first as well before you come on. I said, great, let's do it. So we had a follow-up call, and she was doing a series on EMPs. It was about a year ago, February a year ago. And it was a whole month of Saturday night shows about EMPs, because somehow she became aware that it's a real problem. And it could be the end of, there's a report before Congress, or was, in 2008 by the Brookings Institute, that said that if an EMP were to go off and take out the lights across America, 90% of the American population will kill itself off before civility and society comes back to some form of normalcy. So she finds that horrific, and so we talked. And I said, well, Judge, do you know the number one likely source of an EMP is in America? And she goes, well, yeah, North Korea. I said, no. And she said, Russia? I said, no. She said, China? No. Somebody from the Middle East? No. And she goes, well, who's left? I said, our own government. And she says, what do you mean?
You bet.
And I said, well, let's say we have an uprising, which many are predicting. I'm not hoping. I'm not a part of it. We're not a militia, by the way, nor are we a cult. All right, just get that out of the way. But I said, let's say we have an uprising, which, if they continue to screw with the election process, and dismiss people's votes, that could trigger it. If they take away our money and bail in the banks, not bail out, and I think you probably know what bail in means, people get wiped out, that could start it. There's all sorts of things that could trigger it. We're on the verge. And anyways, and I said, what better strategy for Washington, and I'll use his name, Obama, to stop his opposition, to freeze them in their tracks, than to set off an EMP in our own country, high above, and blame it on a rogue nation, i.e. North Korea, i.e. therefore a false flag.
Oh yeah.
And knock out everything that your opposition has. No lights, no power, no fuel, no food, no communication, no transportation, no nothing. So while the government is hardened and has the ability to continue to operate and flush out, the so-called opposition. So she said to me, "Oh my God, Robert, you're absolutely right." She goes, "I agree with you 100%." And she goes, my God. She goes, there's only one problem. I can't have you on the show now. And I said, why? And she says, because we can't let you tell that to the American people. That is just too telling. It's you're on the mark. And she says, we just, as a major news network, can't be putting that out there. And she goes, but I totally agree with you. And she was kind of horrified by the prospect. So anyway, so man-made, yeah. But let's talk about natural events. They're already happening. We're having swarms of earthquakes. We're having, just in the last week, there was several in the 6.8, 7.2 down in Ecuador with aftershocks. They're suppressing the information now. In fact, Yellowstone no longer is live in their reporting of the earthquakes that they're experiencing there. In fact, they've taken not only down the live charts and tables telling you what happened, but also the maps that show the history. So you can see a week in a glance or a month at a glance of the cluster of quakes that have been happening. And, why? Why are they taking it down? They can flip the switch and put it back on. Well, they're hiding something. And so, many believe that Yellowstone may go. And with it, maybe Mount St. Helens, which, by the way, the dome that was building before it blew in 1981, I think it was, has rebuilt itself. And it's now domed up again, and it could be ready to go. The destruction of Mount St. Helens, which was something like, a 20-mile path in one direction, and I personally went there after the event and saw all the trees and the destruction. It was really like the moon. It was eerie. But it's a speck of sand on a beach compared to what Yellowstone will do. And so is Yellowstone about to go with all these other earthquakes? Who's next is California. I'm sitting in California myself. I live in San Diego area on the coast. My house is on the market. It's pretty expensive. And I've got a lot of equity. And the reason it's on the market is I want to get out of here. I believe I'm now on borrowed time in California. And so I want to get my nest egg out of here. But then to show you how I think, and I don't think I'm paranoid, where am I going to take that money? Am I going to go put it in the bank? I actually asked my broker and title company, can we do a transaction in gold? In other words, I'll hand you the deed, you hand me the gold. So we bypass the bank altogether. But I'm serious. I would not put a few $1 million in any bank right now, because tomorrow morning that bail-in can happen and we're wiped. I'd be wiped. And so, we all have problems and we all have worries. And it's not just where you're going to shelter, but right now it's preservation of everything you've got. So anyways, Fukushima, earthquakes, volcanoes. There's something like 32 volcanoes erupting around the Pacific Rim, I think it is alone. We're getting bombarded with asteroids or meteors. There's some report that one hit the North Atlantic off of New York just last weekend and created a tsunami of 55 feet that one of the buoys picked up when it suddenly rose 55 feet and came back down. Why there was no shoreline tsunami and a wave that was noticeable, I don't know. But it's just one of the reports. And so, we've also heard the magnetosphere is in a flux. And, that's our shields, to protect us from solar radiation. And there was another report I read that over the weekend, I think it was Saturday night, the magnetosphere collapsed.
Yeah, I did that story yesterday for a couple hours.
Yeah, not 100%, but enough to cause great concern. Now, if that's the case, why aren't we all radiated?
Right.
And the So you know, you've already reported it. But the point is, there are things happening on our planet. You know, they're blaming it. Get this. The CBS News reported a week or two ago that the Earth is experiencing a wobble, okay? But they blamed it on global warming. Really? So, wait a minute. So some ice melting over there or the weather is going to cause the Earth to, wobble?
No, man. No. It's meat eaters, man. It's cow flatulence again. That's what it is, because enough of us haven't gone vegan. And then there's an article today
that it's called "Take All Those Useless Eaters." I think we call them liberals. I'm sorry. If they want to save the planet, start one soul at a time. Theirs.
Soylent Green. I keep seeing a vision of Soylent Green.
If you're old enough, when I go to Starbucks, I see that green shake they make, and I always go, Soylent Green. And it's funny because very few people get it. They're not of our vintage, you see.
No. Did
you mean by this?
Did you see the article the other day that carbon dioxide increases has resulted in the greening of the planet? These people are absolute. I mean, Robert, they're just abject dumbasses. They think they know what they're talking about, and they don't. But I mean, that thing that Obi-Wan says, who's the bigger fool, the fool or the fool that follows him? It's the fool that follows him is the bigger fool. No, there's no doubt about it. Anyway.
Sheeple. They don't do their research. They show up at rallies like Trump, and they're holding up signs that are, spiteful and hateful, for Trump. And they're asked, why? Why are you here? What is it you don't like? Well, I don't know. I was just told to be here, I mean, there's enough of those kind of candid reports from, there's a guy on Bill O'Reilly's show, The Waters World, where he goes out and interviews people and just shows the idiocracy of the general population, CNN did a story a few years ago, which I don't watch CNN, but I remember the story, hearing of it and so on, and that is that they reported 28% of Americans have some form of mental retardation or another. 28%. Now, I can tell you in one of the neighborhoods that we have a shelter, I think it's more like 60 or 70%. So there are so many people that don't have a clue. The IQ is so low. Unfortunately, it's not my job to save them. They have to save themselves. And one of the things that I noted over the years is that we don't sell anybody. People say, reporters early on, well, aren't you kind of like, capitalizing on people's fears? And I always go, you mean the way your newscast does, by reporting everything that, if it bleeds, it leads, and chasing fire engines? And one of the best for that is, of course, Mr. Geraldo himself. Whatever the event is, he'll be out there in the middle of the hurricane. I'm reporting from. And then they cut to a commercial where they're making money. And so anytime I say that to them, you mean like you do? They snicker and they go, you got me. And I love doing it. But where were we? The point I was going to make is, people don't have a clue. And what I find when they come to Vivos, the people that actually do buy into Vivos, buy a membership and co-ownership of their shelter, they know more than I do. I'm really surprised. They come to me and they're telling me stuff that I didn't know anything about. And so we sit down and we could talk for days and weeks, and I'm going, oh my God. So we don't sell anything. People buy. People come to us that already get it, that already want a solution and a shelter. And it's our job then to just basically usher them in, help them any way we can. We provide financing if necessary. But, screen out the bad guys. We don't want any freaks in the shelter. But again, that'll bring up another comment, which is, what happens if somebody does flip out? when we're under lockdown. Well, guess what? I might flip out. You might flip out. We don't know, how anybody's going to handle it. Nature will take its course.
Yeah.
But we do know that we have doctors to help comfort them, psychologists, we have medication, and if all of that doesn't work, and they're a threat to somebody else in a shelter, we have a security team, and that team will do what it has to do. Just like if you're on an airplane at 30,000 feet, and somebody goes to the door and tries to open the door, what are you going to do? You're going to do whatever you have to save everybody's lives. We have detention areas that we can put them, but we also have one little rule that's in the bylaws, and it says if you're a threat to the shelter and the sheltered group, you can be evicted. So, that basically means bring no harm to others. But should they be uncontrollable, and maybe they're just screaming and everybody's going crazy, they can't find any peace with that person just nonstop screaming. If so, and we can't fix it, then the door swings both ways, and given the first opportunity to have that door open, unfortunately, they would be gone, just like on an airplane. And so, we've set it up as best we can for everybody's benefit, not for mine. In fact, we have a very thick package of rules and regs and bylaws and all sorts of things, procedures, and it's been vetted by, let me just say, many government officials have looked at Vivos and wanted to know more. And they've reviewed our package of materials, and they've unanimously said, wow, you really thought this out. You have set this up perfectly. We're really impressed. And so, when we were done with those discussions, of course, we got up from the conference table, and I said, would you guys like to do a man hug? I'll do a nice man hug. In other words, we became friends. They understood that Vivos is very straightforward, and it's exactly up and up. In fact, let me say this. If I was doing what I'm doing above ground, I wouldn't be talking to you.
Right.
And nobody would care. It's the only interest here is that we're doing it below ground. What's going on? I can't see it. Pandora's box. Prying eyes. People want to know.
I predict that it'll be what you're setting up here that actually may prove to be the salvation of mankind altogether. Because eventually, if everybody followed this model, what would eventually happen is these groups would link up and civilization would begin again, and they would have maintained the most important tools, the most important books, the most important technical knowledge and spiritual knowledge, most of all, because that's where we originate. We originate from the spirit, and that's all there is to it. We are spiritual beings that occupy a physical body and are experiencing a physical life, but that's not the end of it. It's not at all. And the science fiction authors predicted this. The ancient Native American stories, they didn't bother to write very much down, as I recall. And all these various groups, which in one form or another have managed to survive over millennia, they all know it's coming. They know that these things happen. There are extinction events. Of course, again, as Tyler Durden said, on a long enough timeline, the survival rate for everybody is 0, but you have to prepare. It's not just about us. It's so that the race of mankind can go on.
That's right. It's not about you and me. And it's not about, the first, sorry to interject, John.
No, it's good.
On point here. The very first meet and greet we had at a Vivos shelter, there was about 15 to 20 people, and we all sat down and spent the 2-day weekend, meeting and greeting, getting to know each other. And I looked around the room, and I noticed that everybody was 55, 60, 65. There was no children, and there was nobody young, nobody that was reproductive or able to reproduce. And I said to myself, wow, is that what this is all about? Is this why I did this? And I actually got a little depressed. And then I didn't say anything to anybody, but a little later, as I thought it out, I said, I got to compliment everybody here. You are the founders of Vivos. If it wasn't for you, this small initial group, I wouldn't have been able to do it. Wouldn't have been able to pull it off. And so, think of yourselves as those that are, because of your interest and your effort and your involvement and your belief, you're going to make it possible. You may make it possible for mankind to survive. We don't know if the government's going to survive. I hope, God forbid, they survive and we don't. I don't think the government and the super elite are the only ones that deserve to live. So, Vivos is the only private enterprise solution out there. There is no other co-ownership shelter group around the world. John, you're going to love this. One of the cynical British newspapers, I can't remember if it was the Daily Mail or Mirror or something like that. We've been in all of them. We did a story about the 1% elite heading to Vivos shelters. And at the bottom of the article, they had a question, a poll that you could click and voice your opinion. And the question was, do the 1% deserve to live? I couldn't believe it. In other words, there's such class warfare that they're even going to they're asking the have-nots if the haves deserve to live. Who are they to ask anybody if they deserve to live? It's like they think the 1% are all so bad. By the way, I know a few of them. I've met with one of the Forbes 50 and so on and so on. They come to us as Vivos. And, they're not bad people. They didn't create these great things that created jobs, that created technology in our society. There are leaders of our society. Why do you have to hate them so much? And so, one of the problems the world has is hate. And again, I'll go back to intolerance. And so one of the things that Vivos is none of the above. You asked me earlier how I came up with the name. It came to me the same way that the idea for Vivos came to me, although 35 years later. I was sitting in a coffee shop. And once I decided in 2008 to do this, to move forward, I said, okay, well, I've got to come up with a name. And I try to name everything I do, put a name on it to give it life, to give it an identity, so now I can refer to it that way. If you remember when 9/11 happened, for about a week, everybody was saying on the news, what are we going to call this event? September something or other? And they finally coined 9/11. All right? But they had to, because you got to give it its own life and personality so we can refer to it. So I'm sitting in a coffee shop, and I'm looking around at some of the brands and the names of coffee on the shelf, and I'm trying to run these words through my mind, and all of a sudden I got this name, Vivos, and I had no idea what it meant. There was no coffee named Vivos or tea, and I went back. I said, "Wow, that's a powerful name." I went back to my office, and I looked it up, and it's Latin, and it means to live or the living. So I said, "Oh my God, that's the perfect name," and tried to register it and get the domain, and it was taken. So we went with Terra Vivos, Earth to live. And that's exactly what we are. My name is Vicino, and it means neighbor. So how about that? Neighbors, Earth to live. I don't know. But I think everything that has happened to me and this business in the last 8 years, including the struggles, is meant to be. It's profound. For whatever reason, I was chosen. I have the skill sets, and I've been able to fight it out and make it happen. My goal is to have shelters for 7,000 people. We're going to come up with that number. That represents 1 in a million people on the planet. That's all. That's all. My goal. If I can even reach that, I'll be amazed. But we're on the track, and depending on how much time we have, we're going to build them as long as we can for as many as we can. But you got to ask, what are the other 999 whatever going to do? All right, I feel for them. By the way, we haven't talked about Europe. Do you want to do that?
Wow, man. You know, Robert, I'm going to be in touch with you, man, because I think that you're onto something that's really extraordinary here. It's more than just a hole to hide in. It is so much more than a hole to hide in to, like, survive the big blast and then come out to what? Just wander like Obi-Wan around the face of the what's left of what you knew as planet Earth. And by the way, I'm really sorry, in as much as this means anything. I am really sorry about what's happened to California and the entire Pacific coast. I miss California every day. I mean, I love Texas. I'm not a native Texan, but I got here at about 4.5 years old. I got here as soon as I could. But I'll tell you, that is arguably the most beautiful state in this country and one of the most beautiful places on earth. And it is so tragic, all this sea life dying and all this crazy stuff. You know, nobody can deny that there is nobody can deny that there is good and evil. I mean, I really think that if people just settle down and just let go for a minute, let go of that ego thing for a minute and just meditate, you'll realize that it really is a battle between good and evil all of the time. I just got an email from a fellow named Ron. He's been a police officer. Well, he retired in '01. He's working in PR now, but he says, now for the real reason for my email. Upon listening to last night's show, you mentioned people who are experiencing medical issues involving respiratory as well as other symptoms. In my case, it's lasted for several months to the point of thinking possible pneumonia. No one can find anything. In fact, I'm scheduled for a nuclear stress test this Thursday. Numerous coworkers are experiencing the same issue, and honestly, no doctors have come up with a diagnosis. So the question of what they're spraying in our atmosphere has really hit home. And he says how old he is. He says a guy who's always looked up, patrolled tens of thousands of hours in his community, and cannot remember observing chemtrails until the 90s over, he's in the New York area. He says, stick it with it, John B., you're truly onto something. And it's like threats from evil people are pointed at us. And I really think that you are onto something. I mean, I really do. This is how humanity may survive. Steady people, help each other. Massive support system, no indoctrination, no crazies, no fanatics, fit in or bleep off, right? That's the way it's got to be. That is the way it's got to be. We've all seen that movie where they wind up shooting that guy with the flare gun because he's got a gun now, and they're trying to survive in this lifeboat. Remember that black and white movie when we were kids? I can't remember what the name of it was. It was a shipwreck situation. They're all in this boat, and they wind up with a loony on board. You can't have that in a stress situation. You just can't. You have to be prepared to shoot your own dog if it comes down to it, and you don't expect anybody else to do it for you. So I don't know what else I can say other than we support you, and I'm going to personally stay in touch with you because I got a couple ideas that I want to run past you and just see what you think of them. And I'm not looking for a jackpot or a paycheck or any of that. It's just that I think the timeline is getting shorter for humanity's condition as we have known it up to this point. I mean, there's plenty of insanity and crazy murder, everything else to go around, but there is a solution. Because that stuff tends to take care of itself, sort of like having two gangs in the city. One gang, okay. Two gangs, they're going to annihilate each other. And that's kind of what I'm thinking, that these factions are going to wind up annihilating each other. The best thing to do is go with martial arts masters rule number 1, just avoid. Go ahead.
Yeah, we can't stop it, any of this, but we can protect you from it.
Yes.
And is my slogan. Let me say this. Unfortunately, with everything that's going on in the world, and I don't want to come off as a doom and gloomer or that there's any hate here or anything, but unfortunately, I think the world does need to hit the big reset button. And whether I like it or not, they're already planning it. If you want to talk about the Illuminati, the Rothschilds and so on, or the Georgia Guidestones, and there's, the Bill Gates, the Ted Turner. Ted Turner, said we should have less than about 250 million people on the planet. What's his name? Prince Edward, the husband of the Queen, said if he had to come back, he would like to come back as a virus.
Oh, yeah, that was Philip.
Yeah, Prince Philip.
Yeah.
And
Nutcase.
my point is that there are those out there that really intend to reduce this population, and be it through chemtrails, or be it through a complete, collapse, or war that they are stoking on both sides. I mean, look at the race baiting that has happened, in Ferguson and elsewhere in, Maryland, and this country's never been more divided. I don't remember having any prejudice in the 80s towards black people, nor do I remember such racism in America 20 and 30 years ago. They have split and divide. They have created the racism in America. My attitude is, and here's my preferred statement: I don't care about the color of your skin, but I do care about the color of your attitude. And the problem is, so many people, have this attitude that we owe them, and it's, shame on us. And it's the same thing as the one percenters. They hate the one percenters. There's so much hate going around. It's unbelievable. So, look, I'm aware of it. I study it every day. I spend 2 or 3 hours a day researching, as I would hope you do, and your listeners are doing just by listening to your show. I think knowledge is power, so I try to gather as much information as possible, and our members do too. And it's often I'll send out something of interest, and they'll say, "Yeah, Robert, we already saw it." And because they're all on the ball as well, they're all monitoring everything that's going on, and that's why they chose to buy into Vivos. So will we see a big reset? I don't know. But by the way, from a medical point of view, did you know that 50% of all men over 50 in America now have diabetes type 2? And
Wonder what caused that.
100 years ago, it was only 1 or 2%.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that autism is going and growing at a rate? Last number I heard was 80. Well, the prediction is it's going to be 1 out of every 2 children born are going to have to be autistic.
What about 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will get cancer? That's going around now too.
So is this from the air, or is it from GMO? Monsanto, chemicals and foods.
From all of it.
Where's it coming from? Is it from vaccines? There's a movie coming out called Vaxxed.
Oh yeah.
Definitely a must see. But it's those that are unaware, those that are of total belief in their leaders and confidence, and unflappable, are the ones that unfortunately are going to be the victims of it. I came up with a coined term. It's called come to me. Wait a minute. Ignorass. Ignore-ass. And what that is the ignorant people that stick their head in the sand because they don't want to hear it, and they don't want to know, and they don't agree. Well, that's fine, but remember, your ass is hanging out.
Yeah.
And it'll still be slaughtered, So
when the big lawnmower comes by, your backside's over with. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have so many things to be concerned about. Let me give you this one. I was sitting in a coffee shop. Why do I always go to coffee shops? I do it every afternoon. For sanity, I've got to just get out of the office and go sit for an hour or two and relax. So, but anyways, I was in a coffee shop and I was sitting at a table, and an old guy was sitting across from me. When I say old guy, he was in his 80s, sourpuss, really negative-looking expression on his face, and he said, "So, what do you do?" And pardon, may I have a few jokes here on your show, John?
Sure, man.
Okay, so my quick response is when somebody says, "What do you do?" I always go, "Blondes," Sorry, that was as far as I'm going to go. And but I said to him, "What I do? I build shelters." And he said, "What? This is crazy." And I said, "Why? Why do you think it's crazy?" He said, "This stuff's never going to happen in our lifetimes." He said, "This is crazy." And I said, "Well, you're a little older than me. Maybe you're right. but I believe in my lifetime it's going to happen. And I said, so let me ask you something. Do you work for the government? And he said, no. I said, so you're not some kind of government expert that studies this stuff so that you can make the statement you just made? And he says, no. I said, well, then are you an astronomer? And he said, no. I said, are you a scientist? He said, no. I said, oh, you're a psychic. I didn't realize you're a psychic. And he goes, what are you talking about? And I said, well, you just made a prediction that this stuff is never going to happen. You have no qualifications. You just, came out with this, blurted this statement. So I got to know, what are you basing it on? And he said, well, my belief. And I said, your belief? He goes, yeah, I don't believe it'll ever happen. I said, oh, so because you don't believe it, it's therefore not going to happen. I said, that's an interesting view of life. I didn't realize that's how it works. You got to open your mind, my friend, and open your belief system to understanding what's really going on in the world. He got up. He was a golf pro, and he had, apparently when he was active, and his legs were really bowed, And I got to tell you something. It was pretty nasty. He got up and he stood and he looked down at me in the chair and he says, "Your mother was a monkey." And I said, "Oh, okay." And he walked out. And I figured, he was so irate. This brought out such hostility in him that he used the number one hateful thing he could think of, which was probably what kids said to him when he was young. Remember, he was bow-legged like a monkey?
Right.
So I don't mean to be mean, but I'm just saying, understand how people think. Look where he's coming from. All right? Look, if you want to put your head in reality shows and not see the real reality of what's going on the planet, that's your choice. Everything's a matter of choice. Do you want to get that RV this year? Do you want to get a new car? Do you want to get a boat? Do you want to take a vacation? Do you want to get the cabin in the woods for pleasure? Or do you want to get yourself a survival solution, called Vivos? And if it's not Vivos, go do something else. I've had people say, well, what do you recommend to people that can't afford this? And I recommend they go down to Home Depot and get a shovel and get started, and stop being a victim and start preparing whatever way they can. Go into the mountains, find a cave, go plant your provisions, bury them, have them there for when you need them. I've even told people that, that are going to have to drive 1,000 miles to get to Vivos, that besides having extra fuel and tanks that they take with them, maybe they want to plan their route and find a real remote spot in a field or in the woods, preferably, where they go and dig a hole and they put gasoline or diesel fuel down in there with the additive so it lasts longer, and bury it. So along the way, they got their own gas station, all right? So they can refill and continue on. And so it's all a matter of creativity. It's all a matter of just thinking out, what will I do? But to wait till the last minute to think about it, I know what you're going to do. You're going to probably die. You're not going to make it when this stuff happens. And as you know, John, and most of your listeners and those that are informed, it's going to happen. It's going to happen sooner or later. It's cyclical. It has happened before. If you believe in Nibiru, it's inbound every 3,600 years. I knew Zechariah Sitchin, the father of really the thorough analysis of Planet X Nibiru. And anybody that doubts that, tell them to go do a little research of 1983. The New York Times, U.S. News and World Report, etc. There were many articles about Planet X found. They used NASA sent up a telescope or